Russia, a nation left unfazed by the Enlightenment and its ordeals until the 18th century when this lady became empress. Although some viewed her as a leader who promised great change with little fulfillment, Russian Empress Catherine the Great implemented ideas from the Enlightenment, such as educational reform, and championed the arts. Therefore, Catherine the Great ushered in an era of Russian Enlightenment. During the 17th century, the Russian people who were frustrated with current governing began searching for a new bloodline for the Russian monarchy. They eventually found it in this dude named Michael Romanov, who was officially elected Tsar in 1613. He started the legendary Romanov Empire, whose time and power included Catherine the Great's era because her husband was Michael's grandson. However, the early Romanov rulers were weak because most of them ascended during their early teenage years. Power was constantly shifting because of conflicts the young, weak rulers couldn't settle, like the urban uprisings from 1648 to 1650 and the Great Peasant Rebellion in 1670 to 1671. Yet, the absolute monarchy style of government was finally solidified and heavily defined when Empress Elizabeth of Russia came into power, who ruled Russia for 20 years prior to Catherine. Now let's take a look at how she inherited the throne, as she wasn't a direct blood relative of the Romanovs. Born to Princess Joanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp and Prince Christian August, Catherine the Great came from nobility in the absence of wealth, which gave them close connections to noble people. Her mother then used these family connections to ultimately achieve an arranged marriage for Catherine to her second cousin, Peter the Great. Catherine and Peter were officially married in St. Petersburg in 1745, and Peter was crowned Emperor Peter III of Russia in January of 1762. This made Catherine become the Empress Consort. During Peter's brief rule, Catherine could see the need for liberal domestic reforms, and she became skeptical of her husband's intentions for Russia. With support from the public and Russia's imperial army, Catherine's doubts led her to arrest Peter and force him to abdicate the throne, although he had only ruled for 6 months. Seen here is a portrait depicting the event of Catherine the Great riding in on a militia horse in a guard's uniform. This visualizes the abrupt and courageous approach she took to make Peter surrender his crown, especially because she was a woman in the 18th century. Unfortunately, Peter was assassinated quickly after his arrest and abdication, allowing Catherine to rise to power as the sole ruler of Russia. She was officially crowned Empress Regent as Catherine II of Russia in September of 1762, just 8 months after her ex-husband had ascended to the throne. Now let's get into exactly how Catherine introduced an era of enlightenment to Russia. During her reign, the Empress partnered with prominent French Enlightenment philosopher Denis Diderot, who is claimed to have considerable influence on her beliefs. In exchange for her publishing his book in Russia, titled the Encyclopedia, which was often referred to as the Book of the Enlightened, after it was prohibited by the French government, as well as rescuing him from bankruptcy by purchasing his entire library, Diderot returned the favor by hiring writers, artists, engineers, and scientists on her behalf and sending them to St. Petersburg. The first official motion Catherine made in the Russian government was the Instructions of Catherine II to the Legislative Commission of 1767, which implemented Enlightenment ideas in its rules. Here, you'll see some examples. While forming these new codes of law, Catherine gathered 564 delegates from every province of Russia in Moscow during 1767, with the intent to take their issues and needs into account. Her vice-chancellor, Prince Alexander Goldstein, read them to the delegates, and she open-mindedly accepted their complaints and petitions. Thus, not only did she create them on fundamentals of the Enlightenment, but she also triumphed in understanding her subjects from integrating the delegates that represented Russia's population and listening to their input. Regardless of Catherine's Enlightenment beliefs and personal dislike of the idea of serfdom, nobles began vocalizing their yearn to have more power in local governments and industrial and commercial branches. Because she realized that the success of her reign depended largely on the nobility, as laws made prior to her enlightened influence granted most political power to them, she was forced to create the charters of 1785 to the nobility in the towns, therefore granting nobles with more power by breaking all citizens into 6 different groups, which created a new estate and granted nobles the legal ability to enforce rules and rights on members of their province. Some historians may look at this as a huge factor, contradicting claims stating that Catherine strongly believed in Westernization and the Enlightenment, but on the contrary, it's more often viewed as a tactical move and a sacrifice she had to make in order to stay in power to keep slowly transforming Russia's legal ways. So in conclusion, although majority of Catherine's rules were not fully recognized by the Russian Board of Commissions, and her creation of the charters of 1785 to the nobility in the towns contradicted her Enlightenment beliefs, her attempts at social reform, like the instructions of Catherine II to the legislative commissions of 1767, and her ability to read her subjects' cries for change, left her as one of the most influential figures in the incorporation of Enlightenment ideals into the Russian government. When looking back through the nation's history, she is ultimately one of the fundamental reasons why the laws that can be seen in Russia today, when dissected, contain many Western beliefs from the Enlightenment.